Prior to COVID arriving in Canada, there were all these protests in different parts of the country about the Wet'suwet'en situation in British Columbia and a proposed pipeline that was going forward. So we got this impression that the community itself maybe wasn't supportive. And we often hear this when it comes to different natural resource projects in Aboriginal communities across Canada, this idea that somehow the people are not supportive, the people on the ground. Well, today we're going to hear about the other side to learn a little bit more about what Aboriginal people think at the grassroots level about these different projects in the natural resource sector, whether they're mining or oil and gas, forestry, and so forth. And here to talk with me about it is John Desjarlais. He's the Executive Director of Indigenous Resource Network. John, thank you for taking a few minutes to chat today.
My absolute pleasure, Colin. It's great to be on today.
So why don't we start off with your organization? Could you tell us just a little bit about Indigenous Resource Network?
Absolutely. So the Indigenous Resource Network is a network of Indigenous workers and businesses and economic interests in the natural resource sector. And so including organizations, businesses in supply chain, as well as workers in the different industries right across Canada, across all natural resource development sectors.
And so if we think about the development of natural resources in this country, how many people are either employed directly or indirectly in different Aboriginal communities in that because of those natural resource projects moving ahead?
Absolutely. And so the natural resource sector is one of the largest, at least industrial employers of Indigenous people right across Canada. Considerable employment base, not just kind of, I think, a depth as well too in the industry. And the natural resource sector also has, I think, some of the largest wages paid to Indigenous people. I think, in particular in oil and gas, 3 to 1 in terms of Indigenous dollars and wages being spent with Indigenous people. And so it's one of the industries, natural resource sector is one of the industries, or some of the industries that are outpacing, I think, other industries in terms of equitable pay for Indigenous people.
And is it a regional issue? Like, are we seeing that there's more employment in the natural resource sector for Aboriginal people in say, one province more than another, or one region more than another? Is it pretty widespread across Canada when it comes to this issue?
Yeah, I think in terms of employment and employment opportunities and supply chain opportunities, I think it's fairly consistent across Canada, where you see in forestries and fisheries out east and in the west coast, the energy industry in central and western Canada. I think you see generally Indigenous people participating at typically the same types of opportunities. And so the impact is different. I guess the different industries is, that have larger spend and procurement opportunities. You see greater economic impact, particularly in the West, some of the mining activities in the North. But yeah, generally, it's fairly consistent right across Canada.
And so what are the trend lines looking like in this country, John, when you think about the amount of activity in Canada when it comes to natural resource development and how Aboriginal communities are involved in that? How does that compare today with, say, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Have we seen much of a change?
Things are dramatically and drastically changing, especially over the last 5 years. There's a couple different things happening. So we all know with the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, with the conversations around economic reconciliation happening, that's certainly a catalyst for understanding, the socioeconomically, why do we need to include Indigenous people in much more meaningful ways? And that's also being supported by, I think, the jurisprudence and in regards to resource development. And so I think law has demonstrated that Indigenous people need to be included in much more meaningful upfront ways in development projects. And so those two things together, we're seeing Indigenous communities engaged in much more meaningful ways, looking to develop, relationships and partnerships past dealing with risk and transactions and part of process. And again, happening at rates that are incredibly much quicker than we've seen in the past 20, 25 years. We've seen more change probably in the last 2 or 3 years than we've seen in the past.
Okay, and when we come back, we're going to dig more into this issue, including the environmental aspect, which is obviously important.